Gemini, after this nobody will recognize you. Change will make you think you're someone else. The winds of transformation are stirring. And this time, they won't just rustle your outer world. They will rebuild the very structure of who you believe yourself to be. What's approaching is not simply a phase, not a minor shift, but a metamorphosis so complete, so undeniable, that even those closest you will ask, who are you becoming? And in truth, you may not know how to answer. Not yet, because what's emerging within you isn't something you've planned. It's not a reinvention based on logic or a checklist of improvements. It's deeper, it's raw, it's your real self, the one who has been whispering beneath every performance, every polite compromise, every version of you that tried to please the world. That self is rising now, and the moment you allow it to take the lead, your life will never be the same again. In this message, we're not just talking about change, we're talking about rebirth. And if you've been feeling restless, emotionally saturated, or like you're outgrowing the skin you're in, this is not coincidence. This is your soul preparing for emergence. So breathe deep, Gemini. Trust what's unfolding. And if this resonates, share and subscribe to stay with us through the next gates, because this journey is only beginning. Gate 1. The Gemini you've been was only a fragment of the one you're becoming. Gemini, if you've ever looked at your reflection and felt a subtle disconnect, as if the image staring back at you belonged to someone you've outgrown, know that this is not imagination. It's prophecy. A soul's prophecy that has waited patiently for you to reach the threshold of now. You see, for so long, you've been known for your brilliance, your versatility, your quick mind that can adjust, adapt, and mirror back to the world what it wants to see. But this remarkable gift, when left unguarded, slowly becomes a costume. You wear roles like a chameleon wears colors, not to deceive, but to connect, to protect, to survive. And somewhere along the way, something inside you whispered, is this really me or just what they expect me to be? You've been called curious, expressive, witty, but beneath the surface of that agile mind lives a heart that has learned to split itself in two. One part pleases, one part hides, one performs, one aches quietly behind the laughter. And while those around you may have only seen the confident, sparkling, socially magnetic Gemini, they've missed the quiet revolutions that have been taking place in your inner world. Because you, more than anyone, know how to keep a storm contained behind a charming smile. But the container is breaking now. The mask is melting. And what's coming is not a new version of the old you. It's someone the world has never truly met. It is a Gemini who no longer needs to edit herself to be lovable. A Gemini who no longer confuses adaptability with silence. A Gemini who no longer betrays herself in the name of being understood. And this birth will not happen gradually. It will not ask permission, like a thunderclap splitting the sky. It will arrive in a moment when you can no longer pretend. It will be undeniable, irreversible, and oddly liberating. What you're beginning to experience now is the falling away of false selves. These are the versions of you that were never wrong, but were never fully whole. The Gemini who dimmed her light to avoid intimidating others. The Gemini who played small in relationships so she wouldn't be abandoned. The Gemini who performed emotional acrobatics just to maintain balance with people who refused to meet her halfway. These selves were created for survival, but now survival is enough. Your soul is hungry for expression. It wants truth, rawness, wholeness, and it's tired of shape-shifting just to stay accepted. You may already feel it, that quiet refusal rising within you. The way you no longer tolerate certain conversations, environments, or people. The way your body tenses when you are not being authentic. The way silence now feels more honest than trying and perform connection. This is not rebellion. This is revelation. The Gemini within you, the one who holds both light and shadow, brilliance and depth, complexity and simplicity. That Gemini is finally demanding to live without censorship. And yes, there will be people who resist this change. Friends who enjoyed the flexible version of you. The easygoing Gemini who never said no, who always adapted, who could be whoever they needed. They may pull away. They may call you selfish. They may say, "You've changed." And they'd be right. You are changing. You are becoming. And anyone who only loved the edited version of you was never loving you at all. This will hurt. You'll feel a grief for relationships you outgrow. You will mourn the comfort of fitting in, even when it came at the cost of yourself. But this grief is sacred. It's the ashes from which your real self will rise. You were not born to be everyone's mirror, Gemini. You were born to be a prism, to take in light and refract it into something new, something bold, something unrepeatable. This transformation you're undergoing is a reclamation of all the pieces you gave away in the name of being palatable. And as those pieces return to you, you'll find that your voice changes, your choices change. Even your silence changes, not as an avoidance, but as a declaration of presence. This week, especially, the universe will begin presenting you with subtle opportunities to act from this new space. You'll be offered situations where the old Gemini would have conformed, where the old Gemini would have smiled and nodded and said yes when her soul was screaming no. But you will pause, and in that pause, you'll feel the full force of your power returning. You may tremble the first few times. You may doubt, but then something miraculous will happen. You'll survive. You'll say no and the world won't collapse. You'll show your real thoughts and someone will still choose to stay. You'll risk being disliked and find that your self-respect has never felt more alive. Gemini, this gate is not just about courage. It's about sovereignty. It's about choosing your own becoming, not as a reaction to the world, but as a revolution for your soul. Every version of you that existed up to this point was valid, but none of them are final. You were born under a sign ruled by Mercury, the planet of evolution, movement, thought. You are not meant to stay the same. And this season, this one is unlike any other. It asks you not to tweak, not to adjust, but to surrender to complete metamorphosis of your being. You may wonder who you'll become. You may fear the unknown self that's rising. But I promise you this. The Gemini you're about to meet will be more radiant, more rooted, and more real than anything you've ever allowed yourself to be. She won't need to explain her shift. She will embody it. She won't need to beg for space. She will take it. She won't need to defend her change. Her presence will speak for itself. And those who truly see you, they'll recognize her. Not because they've met her before, but because they've always sensed her waiting beneath the surface. She is not new. She is original, and she is ready. Gate 2, the mask of adaptability. When Gemini's flexibility becomes her cage. Gemini, one of your most celebrated qualities has always been your adaptability. Your ability to read a room, shift your tone, adjust your words, and mirror others' energy is nothing short of extraordinary. People often say you're a social genius, a brilliant conversationalist, someone who can blend into any crowd and make anyone feel comfortable. And they're right. You have mastered the art of navigating complexity with grace. But what happens when that very gift becomes your prison? What happens when the flexibility that once gave you freedom starts stealing pieces of your truth? For years, Gemini, you have worn the mask of being easygoing, of being the one who bends, who adjusts, who smooths over tension with joke or a clever pivot of conversation. You've been the peacekeeper, the one who de-escalates, the one who chooses diplomacy over depth. But deep inside, there's been a quiet hunger growing, a hunger to be seen not for your adaptability, but for your authenticity, a craving to show up not as what's convenient, but as what's true. This mask of adaptability is so subtle, so ingrained, that even you may not have noticed when it fused with your identity. It began as a way to survive, to be loved, to belong. You learned early on that when you made people laugh, they stayed. When you avoided conflict, you were praised. When you listened instead of speaking your raw truth, things stayed calm, and calm felt safe. But now, that calm is costing you something too sacred to ignore: your own voice. Your nervous system feels it first, the tension that rises when you want to say no, but smile and say yes instead. The heaviness that creeps in after yet another conversation where you censored your truth to avoid seeming too much. The exhaustion of pretending to be neutral when your soul is screaming with clarity. Gemini, this gate invites you to look honestly at the places where your flexibility has become self-abandonment, where your desire to connect has led you to disconnect from yourself, where your brilliance has become a veil, hiding your vulnerability. The most powerful part of you, It's easy to think that being agreeable will make you loved. But have you noticed how hollow it feels to be praised for a version of you that isn't whole? There's a loneliness that grows in the hearts of those who are celebrated for their masks. Because deep down, you know the praise isn't landing on the real you. It's hitting the surface. Polished, practiced, pleasant, but not penetrating the truth that lives underneath. And the more you live from that surface, the more distant you feel from yourself. Now is the time to challenge a core belief you've carried for too long, that your truth will scare people away, that your intensity, your depth, your complexity are too much, that you need to lighten up to stay loved. But Gemini, let me ask you this. What if your truth is not the thing that pushes people away, but the very thing that calls your real tribe home? What if your authenticity, even when it shakes a room, is the magnet that draws the right people closer? The people who don't need you to bend or shrink or sweeten your edges. The ones who crave your fullness, not your compliance. This week, the universe will place you in moments where you are tempted to default to the old pattern. Maybe someone asks for your help when you're already stretched too thin. Maybe you're in a conversation and feel the urge to laugh off something that actually hurt. Maybe you're in a situation where silence feels safer than honesty. These moments are not random. They are soul invitations. Invitations to choose you, to pause, to ask yourself, what is my truth here? And to speak it, even if your voice shakes, even if it's messy, even if it doesn't come out perfectly. Because your healing lives not in being perfect, but in being honest. The people who can't hold space for your truth were never meant to be in your inner circle. And the more you practice authenticity, the more clearly you'll begin to see who truly belongs in your life. Some connections will fade. Let them. Some dynamics will rupture. Let them. What's breaking isn't your fault. It's the illusion you've kept alive for too long. And on the other side of that rupture, the possibility of real connection. The kind where you don't have to keep performing to stay loved. This gate is about redefining what safety means to you. For so long, you equated safety with smoothness, with never rocking the boat, never being a source of discomfort, never being the one who says the thing no one else wants to hear. But that kind of safety is a mirage. It keeps you small, silent, split. True safety, Gemini, is living in alignment with yourself. It's being able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I honor my truth today. That kind of integrity builds a different kind of confidence, one that doesn't rely on applause, agreement, or validation, one that comes from within. And here's the paradox. The more you risk being your full self, the more deeply you will be loved, not by everyone, but by the ones who matter. Because when you stand in your truth, you become magnetic. You become trustworthy. People sense your energy and feel a resonance they didn't even know they were craving. Your authenticity gives others permission to drop their own masks. You don't just change yourself, you change the room, the relationship, the dynamic, one honest moment at a time. So this is your invitation, Gemini, take off the mask. Even if just for one moment, even if only with one person, even if it's only with yourself. Say the thing you've been rehearsing in your head. Ask the question you've been afraid to know the answer to. Draw the boundary you keep postponing. Share the feeling you usually translate into a joke. And then breathe. Let yourself feel what it's like to be seen, not for your performance, but for your truth. That's the beginning of everything. That's where your rebirth takes root. Gate 3, the friction of becoming. When growth makes you feel like a stranger to yourself. Gemini, you've begun to tell the truth. You start to show up more authentically, to let go of the masks you've worn for too long. But now, you're entering a stage that no one really talks about. The disorienting, uncomfortable, deeply emotional phase that happens right after you've taken those first steps into your transformation. This is where many turn back, not because they don't want to change, but because they didn't expect the growing pains to feel like heartbreak. You see, what's happening now is not just about removing the old layers. It's about realizing that some of those layers were your only source of comfort, even if they were also your cage. And as you begin to shed them, you may find yourself standing in front of the mirror and asking, who am I now? This feeling is not failure. This is the friction of becoming. This is the identity reboot that occurs when you finally step into your truth, but haven't yet built a new home there. You no longer fit into the spaces that once held you, but you haven't fully grown into the new ones yet. It's like being in between worlds. And this in-between, this emotional purgatory, is sacred. It is here in the moments when you feel most lost that the deepest clarity is born. Gemini, you are always destined for many versions of yourself. You are ruled by Mercury, the planet of change, communication, and duality. But this moment isn't about playing roles. It's about consolidating your fragments into one cohesive truth. That means grieving. That means confusion. That means having days where you feel proud of your growth, and others where you miss the person you used to be, even if she was only a shadow. There will be moments when you try to go back. You'll find yourself reverting to old habits, laughing when you want to cry, saying it's fine when your soul is screaming no. Not because you failed, but because comfort calls louder than courage when you're tired. And you will feel tired, Gemini. You're not just learning how to be different, you're learning how to be, without the scripts, without the constant shape-shifting, without the reflex to please. That kind of raw presence takes energy, it takes practice, and it takes radical self-compassion. What no one tells you about growth is that sometimes it makes you feel lonelier at first. The conversations that used to energize you now feel shallow. The people you once laughed with now seem distant. You're not being dramatic. You're just evolving. You're tuning to a new frequency, and not everyone is tuned in. Some people won't understand your need for depth. Some will miss the version of you that never said no. Some may even accuse you of changing too much. But change is not betrayal. Change is the ultimate act of honesty. And if your truth threatens the bond, then the bond was never honest to begin with. In this gate, you'll be asked to reintroduce yourself, not just to others, but to your own soul. And reintroduction is rarely graceful. It's messy. It's filled with second-guessing. It demands that you unlearn everything you thought was required for belonging. Because Gemini, what's required now is not more charm or cleverness or flexibility. What's required now is stillness, slowness, honesty, space to feel what you never gave yourself permission to feel. For years, you ran from discomfort like it was fire. Now, you must learn to sit in it like it's a teacher. This discomfort is your compass. When something feels tight, it's likely an old identity trying to survive. When something feels expansive but scary, that's a new truth asking to be born. You're not losing your mind, Gemini. You're finding your center. And as you settle into this new version of yourself, your nervous system will begin to recalibrate. You will start to notice the difference between fear and wisdom, between anxiety and intuition, between loneliness and sacred solitude. It is in this recalibration that a new kind of confidence is born. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need validation. It's the confidence that arises when you look at your life and see that you chose it. Not because it was expected, but because it was aligned. And with that alignment, something powerful begins to shift. You stop asking for permission. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for your needs. Because now, you understand that your needs aren't burdens. They are sacred instructions from your soul. And slowly, the world responds. The right people begin to orbit closer. The conversations become deeper, richer, more nourishing. Your creativity begins to flow in ways that surprise you. Ideas arrive like whispers from the divine. And your heart, once numb from years of pretending, begins to beat in full color again. You start to feel joy, not the surface-level joy of being liked, but the soul joy of being real. You smile, not because it's polite, but because something inside you is genuinely alive. This is a reward of Gate 3. It's not fame or applause or even perfect peace. It's authenticity. It's waking up and knowing that you are not performing your life. You are living it. And in that living, you begin to trust yourself again. You begin to speak up more. You begin to soften without collapsing. You begin to take up space in rooms you once tiptoed through. Because now you understand you were never too much. You were never the problem. You were simply evolving faster than your environment could handle. Gemini, this gate is hard. It asks you to confront the ghosts of who you used to be, but it also offers you something priceless, a home within yourself that no one can take from you. So keep walking, even when you feel unrecognizable. Even when the path is unclear, even when the silence feels too loud, you are not lost, you are becoming. And who you're becoming is someone who no longer needs to choose between being loved and being true. Someone who doesn't shrink for safety. Someone who doesn't mold to be accepted. Someone who knows, I am enough, even when I am uncertain. This is the friction of becoming. And you, Gemini, are walking through it with more courage than you realize. Gate 4, the mirror effect. When your change challenges the world around you. Gemini, as you step deeper into your transformation, something almost paradoxical begins to unfold. While you're finally feeling more like yourself than ever before, others may begin to treat you like a stranger. This dissonance between your internal clarity and their external confusion can feel isolating at first. Because just when you're starting to breathe with your full lungs, some of the people closest to you begin to question the air you now choose to breathe. They might say, you've changed, but not in celebration, in suspicion. What they're really saying is, you've stopped being who I needed you to be for my comfort. This is the mirror effect. Gemini, the moment your inner shift begins to reflect back at others the places where they are still stuck. Your growth becomes a trigger, not because you've hurt them, but because you've outgrown a version of the dynamic they depended on. Maybe you were always the one who lightened the mood, absorbed the emotional tension, smoothed over conflict, kept things easy. Now you're setting boundaries, speaking slower, choosing honesty over harmony, and it rattles them. But this is not a sign to shrink back. It is confirmation that you're doing something real. Change, when done honestly, always creates ripple effects. It doesn't just transform your life, it transforms the gravitational field around you. Old friends may start pulling away. Family members may seem more distant. Colleagues may no longer understand your tone. It's not because they don't care. It's because your transformation is now confronting them with questions they're not ready to answer in their own lives. And for someone like you, who has long defined connection as a core part of your identity, this shift can feel like a betrayal. Even when it's not, you may catch yourself thinking, maybe I've gone too far. But pause. Ask yourself, have I gone too far, or have I finally stopped hiding? Because that's the uncomfortable truth. Gemini, many of the bonds you call connection were actually compliance. You kept the peace by sacrificing your voice. You were lovable because you were agreeable. You were needed because you were flexible. And now that you're reclaiming your center, those dynamics no longer function. It's painful to watch people withdraw as you begin to truly show up. But not everyone who exits your life is a loss. Some are simply misaligned with the person you're becoming. That doesn't make them wrong. And it doesn't make you wrong either. It simply means your vibration has shifted, and everything that cannot match it will either fall away or be forced to evolve. Let it. In this gate, you must remember the discomfort others feel around your change is not your responsibility to soothe. You are not obligated to explain your healing. You do not owe anyone a perfectly curated justification for your new boundaries. Your quieter presence, your more assertive truth. If they're confused, let them sit with it. Because what they're really encountering is their own reflection in the mirror of your evolution. And what they choose to do with that reflection is their journey, not yours. Still, this part of your path may feel emotionally raw. Some days, you will miss the simplicity of who you used to be, even if that version of you was secretly exhausted. You will long for the ease of old conversations, even though they never really touched your heart. You will ache for certain faces, even if their presence came at a cost to your authenticity. And that ache is not weakness. It's evidence of your depth. You are allowed to grieve the comfort of roles you no longer fit. But don't let nostalgia convince you to crawl back into a smaller version of yourself just to feel temporarily safe. You are not cold. You are not selfish. You are not arrogant for finally choosing yourself. In fact, the deeper you go into your truth, the more compassionate you become. Not in a performative, people-pleasing way, but in a quiet, steady kind of love that no longer sacrifices self-respect. And this kind of compassion doesn't look like rescuing others. It looks like showing up real, so others know they're allowed to be real, too. Gemini, there's something beautiful that happens when you stop filtering yourself in the comfort of others. The people who truly see you start to emerge. New friendships begin to form, not from shared convenience, but from energetic alignment. You meet people who speak your new language, who feel like exhalation instead of performance, who challenge you in healthy ways, not by questioning your worth, but by reflecting your courage back to you. These connections may come quietly at first. A stranger who speaks words that echo your own heart, a new friend who looks you in the eye and listens, truly listens without needing you to shrink, a mentor who shows you what it means to live from your core. These are not coincidences. They are the soul's response to your new signal. You are broadcasting truth now, and the universe is answering. And yet, not everyone will leave. Some people will surprise you. Someone you thought wouldn't understand may pull you aside one day and say, "I see the change in you and I admire it." Another may confess that your boundaries helped them realize they needed their own. A partner may finally open up in ways they never dared, now that you've modeled emotional honesty. You see, Gemini, your transformation may disrupt, but it also inspires. Your courage to evolve makes it safer for others to do the same. So don't fear being misunderstood. Be willing to be misunderstood if it means being free. Not everyone has to get it. Not everyone has to walk with you. But you owe it to yourself to walk in a direction that aligns with your soul. That means choosing depth over approval, integrity over likability, wholeness over harmony. This is what it means to become. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's also liberating beyond words. You are not meant to be who you were. You are meant to grow beyond even what you imagined. Keep trusting the process. Keep following the signs. Keep showing up as you, especially when it's tempting not to, because you're not just changing your life. You're changing the entire energetic architecture around you. And eventually, it will all rearrange to support the truth you now dare to live. Gate 5. Become an irreplaceable force. When you finally live as your truest self. Gemini, the moment you stop apologizing for who you are, the world around you rearranges. What once felt like resistance now opens like a door. What used to be silence suddenly becomes resonance. And what once seemed like chaos now starts to organize itself around your truth. You're no longer just going through a transformation. You are the transformation. You are the walking, breathing embodiment of what it looks like to stop negotiating with your own spirit. At this stage, you are not explaining yourself. You are expressing yourself. And the difference is profound. When you explain, you seek permission. When you express, you embody. When you explain, you try to be understood. When you express, you trust that those who are meant to understand will simply feel it. You've stepped into the realm where your energy speaks before your words do, and it speaks clearly. This is who I am, not in resistance, but in radiance. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes once the internal war ends. For so long, your energy was split between who you really are and who you felt you needed to be. Now, with nothing left to perform, there's alignment, and in that alignment, you begin to move differently. You don't chase what's not yours anymore. You don't try to convince anyone to love you. You don't bend just to fit into spaces not designed for your growth. Because now you know what's meant for you will never require betrayal of yourself to receive it. You begin to notice how your presence changes rooms. Not because you try, but because authenticity is rare, and people can feel when it's real. You walk into a meeting, and your clarity cuts through the fog. You offer your opinion, and it lands with weight, because it comes from rootedness. You speak your truth, and even those who disagree with you feel conviction in your tone. You're no longer trying to be palatable. You're trying to be true, and the right people are magnetized by it. You'll also find yourself stepping into roles you never thought you'd play. Not because you crave the spotlight, but because the world needs exactly your voice at this time. Suddenly, people begin asking you for guidance. Not because you have all the answers, but because you become a living example of what it means to honor your own. You become the mirror, the lighthouse, the calm amidst other storms. You are no longer available for people who want you to dim your light, to make them feel safe. You are available only for those who are ready to rise with you, or, at the very least, not afraid of your glow. And what about love, Gemini? Here's where the magic gets deeper. Now that you no longer seek connection from a place of emptiness, what arrives in your life is love of a different frequency. Love that respects your boundaries. love that celebrates your fire, love that doesn't require explanation. You no longer crave a partner to complete you. You call in someone who sees a complete you and chooses to walk beside it, not tame it. Intimacy becomes less about performance, more about presence. You don't need to entertain to be loved. You just need to show up real, raw, and radiant. And the ones who are meant to walk with you will meet you there. Friendships shift too. There's less tolerance for conversations that drain you, less interest in maintaining connections out of habit. You'll find yourself naturally drawn to people whose energy feels like clean water, those who can sit in silence with you and still speak volumes, those who challenge you to grow without trying to change you. You'll let go of performative relationships and instead nurture a few that feel soul deep. Your social circle may shrink, but your support system becomes more powerful than ever, and your relationship with purpose transformed. You're no longer interested in roles that merely look good or bring temporary validation. You want work that means something. You want your days to be an extension of your truth, not a contradiction to it. Whether you're an artist, teacher, entrepreneur, healer, or anything in between, you're not doing it for applause anymore. You're doing it because your soul has something to give. And finally, you're letting it give freely. Even your relationship with time and rest begins to shift. You're no longer addicted to productivity. You understand that rest is not laziness. It's sacred. Silence is not a waste of time. It's wisdom. You begin designing your life not around how much you can do, but around how deeply you can feel, create, connect. You stop rushing. You start listening. And in that listening, your intuition becomes your most trusted advisor. Every yes feels clean. Every no feels sovereign. You're not hesitating anymore. You're deciding. Gemini, people may still say, "You've changed." But now you smile and reply, "No, I just stopped pretending." You'll realize that you no longer need to defend your path. You just need to walk it. You'll notice that the things you thought you lost were never really yours. And what's now arriving is richer, deeper, and more aligned than you ever imagined. And most of all, you'll notice yourself. How different you feel in your own skin. How peaceful it feels to be seen by you. How powerful it is to live a life where your spirit no longer needs to whisper. It can finally sing. So here's the truth, Gemini. You didn't become someone else. You became yourself, the one you were before the world told you who to be. And in doing so, you become irreplaceable. Because in a world full of masks, the one who dares to be real becomes unforgettable. Conclusion: the mirror finally reflects the truth. Gemini, take a moment to breathe. Not the kind of breath you take to survive, but the kind you take when you've arrived, when the dust of doubt settles, and what's left is only your truth. Pure, unfiltered, and powerful. You've walked through the gates of awakening. You've peeled back the layers of performance. You've faced the disorientation of change. And now you're home, not in a place, not in a role, but in yourself. The mirror no longer reflects a stranger. It reflects someone who is no longer available for half-loves, for small roles, for quiet compliance. It reflects someone who remembers their power, reclaims their voice, and no longer waits for permission to be whole. You have not become arrogant. You have become aligned. And that alignment changes everything. You'll still feel fear at times. You'll still face moments of uncertainty, but you will no longer abandon yourself to appease others. That old reflex, to shrink, to edit, to perform, has been replaced by a new reflex, to rise, to speak, to live in full color. You don't owe the past an apology for who you've become. You owe the future your full presence. So, if your voice shakes when you speak your truth, speak anyway. If your hands tremble when you choose yourself, choose anyway. If you feel alone in your transformation, remember, your authenticity is calling in a new tribe, one that sees you, not the mask you used to wear. If this message stirred something within you, Gemini, share in the comments how you're stepping into your most authentic self. Whatever you released, what are you reclaiming? Your words might be the sign someone else is waiting for. And if this journey resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe. The metamorphosis is only the beginning. Your new life starts now, and it's going to be breathtaking.